Mine the happiest day of my life. My own father turned my white dress red. You'll never belong to another man, he shouted as his fists robbed me of consciousness. The monster who raised me tried to destroy me at the altar of my freedom. Good morning, my dear friends. What a joy to be able to talk with you today. I'm Margaret Wilson, 78 years old, born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, but I've been living here in Chicago for more than 50 years now. You can call me Grandma Maggie like my grandchildren do. It's such a beautiful day outside with the sunlight coming through my living room window. I love sitting here in this green armchair that my Harold bought for me about 15 years ago. From here I can see the garden I tend with so much care. The begonas are blooming. You know, each little flower is like a miracle to these old eyes. Every morning after breakfast, I come to take care of my plants. I have a little bit of everything. Rosemary, basil, mint, and even some roses that are the apple of my eye. I started this garden when I moved to this little house after Harold retired from the factory. He used to say I had blessed hands because everything I planted thrived. I think it's because I talk to the plants, tell them stories. They like to listen, you know, just like you. On Sundays, my children come over for lunch with the grandkids. I have 5 grandchildren, each one more mischievous than the other. Valerie, 12 years old, already helps me make the apple pie that her grandfather loved so much. My Harold passed away 5 years ago, but it feels like just yesterday we were dancing in the living room to the old radio. These days, besides taking care of my garden, I'm part of a group of ladies at the church. We meet on Tuesdays to knit and crochet. Everything we make goes to families in need in the neighborhood. I started participating in this group after I became a widow. It was a way I found to occupy my mind and heart. You know, when we lose someone we love so much, we need to find new reasons to smile. Oh, before I forget, I wanted to ask a small favor from you. If you like my little story, click on that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this grandma continue sharing her memories with more and more people. It's like you're inviting me for a cup of coffee in your living room. Understand? And you, my dear friends who are watching me now, tell me here in the comments from which town are you watching me. And what time of day did you find this video from Grandma? Are you having your morning coffee, resting after lunch, or getting ready for bed? I always read all the comments and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me. Okay, let's create a chain of affection. Today, I want to tell you a story that I've kept in my heart for many years. A story about a girl who had to learn that sometimes love hurts, and that those who should protect us don't always do so. But it's also a story of overcoming, of how I found true happiness after so much pain. You know, life isn't always a bed of roses. Sometimes the thorns hurt us, and the wounds that take longest to heal are those made by the ones who should love us. But these scars also teach us the most valuable lessons. And that's how it was with me when I was still a dreamy young girl, long before I became this white-haired grandma speaking to you today. I'll take you on a journey back in time to my childhood, when the world seemed too big for a small girl, growing up in the shadow of a man everyone respected but who inside the house was a constant storm. I'll tell you how I survived that storm and found my rainbow. I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 1907, a small brick house in the Kenwood neighborhood. My father, Edward Wilson, worked for the Rock Island Railroad, and my mother, Eleanor, took care of the house and us children. There were 3 of us. Me, the oldest, my brother, Richard, 2 years younger, and Martha, the baby, who arrived when I was already 7 years old. Our house was simple, but my mother kept everything very clean and organized. I remember the smell of floor wax that she applied every week, scrubbing on her knees with a rag. The walls were white, and in the living room was a shelf with some books and their wedding photo in a silver metal frame. In the kitchen, we had a wood stove that heated the entire house on cold winter days. The backyard was hard-packed dirt with a cherry tree in the corner, some chickens scratching around, and a cement wash basin where my mother washed our clothes. Daddy left very early for work while it was still dark, and only returned when the sun was already setting. Mama said he was a hard-working man and that we should be proud of him. And we were, at least until the door closed, and we were left alone with him. From a very young age, I learned to read my father's mood by the sound of his footsteps when he came home. If they were light and quick, it was a sign that it had been a good day. We could smile and even ask a few questions during dinner. But if the steps were heavy and dragging, oh my God, it was the signal to stay quiet, heads down, only answering what he asked without looking him in the eye. Your father has heavy responsibilities, Margaret. He has to support the whole family. It's normal that sometimes he gets nervous. My mother always said when she dried my tears after a more severe scolding from him. But I noticed, even as a child, how she trembled when she heard those heavy footsteps entering the house. In the mornings, I went to Roosevelt Elementary School a few blocks from home. I liked studying, especially when Miss Thompson read stories to the class. She had a magical way of bringing words to life. She was the one who taught me to love books, to find in them a refuge for difficult days. After school, I played a little in the street with the neighborhood children. We played hopscotch drawn with coal on the ground, jacks, or spun tops. My best friend was Doris, daughter of Mr. Franklin, who owned the corner store. She had curly hair and freckles on her nose, and we laughed so much together that sometimes our stomachs hurt. But I could never play for long. Soon I had to go back to help Mama with the household chores. At 8 years old, I was already washing dishes, standing on a chair to reach the sink. At 10, I already knew how to make rice without burning it. My mother said I needed to learn early to be a good housewife in the future. No man wants a woman who doesn't know how to take care of the home, Margaret, she repeated while teaching me to iron clothes or make soap with leftover fat. And you'll need a good husband someday. Sundays were special in Cedar Rapids. In the morning we went to Mass at St. Matthew's Church. Me all proud in my only good dress, light blue organdy with a satin sash at the waist. Afterwards, if Daddy was in a good mood, sometimes he would take us for ice cream at Green Square Park, or to watch the movement of trains at the station. It was in these rare moments that I saw another side of my father. He knew the names of all the locomotives, explained how the machines worked, and even put me on his shoulders so I could see better when an important train passed by. His eyes sparkled when he talked about the railroads, and he smiled in a way we almost never saw at home. But as I grew older, these moments became increasingly rare. When I turned 12, I remember my body began to change, and with it, my father's gaze upon me also changed. Where before there was a certain distant affection, now there was constant vigilance, as if I were a prisoner who needed to be watched. Girls shouldn't stay out late, he would say, pulling me by the arm when I spent a few extra minutes playing with Doris. And it's time to stop with these childish games. You're becoming a young lady. It was around this time that the restrictions began to get more severe. I couldn't wear skirts above the knee anymore. I couldn't talk to boys, not even the neighbors' sons I had played with since I was little. And God helped me if I was a minute late coming back from school. Punishment was certain. Your father just wants to protect you. My mother justified in a low voice while hugging me after he yelled at me. I felt her thin body trembling against mine and realized that she was afraid too. Men out there are dangerous. Daughter, your father knows the world better than we do. But I was already beginning to understand that perhaps the danger wasn't just out there. There were nights when I would wake up to the muffled crying of my mother coming from their room. In the morning, she would appear with dark circles under her eyes, or sometimes with a scarf tied around her head, covering marks that only much later did I understand what they were. In Cedar Rapids at that time, everyone had great respect for my father. At church, he was one of the first to arrive and the last to leave. He greeted the priest with deference, helped at the church festivals, was known for his dedication to work on the railroad. A man of respect, they said. An exemplary family man. How could they not see what happened when the doors closed? How did they not notice the fear in my mother's eyes, the disguised bruises, the heavy silence that fell over our house when he arrived? At the 4th of July celebrations in town, when all of Cedar Rapids gathered to celebrate with bonfires, cider, and square dancing, my father transformed. He smiled at everyone, chatted animatedly, even danced with my mother. People said, "What a beautiful family, the Wilsons." And I, dressed as a farmer girl with braids and painted freckles, pretended it was true that we were really that happy family everyone saw. When I turned 13, the first great tragedy of my life came. My mother, who had been getting sick for some time with a cough that wouldn't go away, was diagnosed with tuberculosis. In a few months, she wasted away before our eyes, getting thinner and weaker, each day until one morning, she simply didn't wake up anymore. With my mother's passing, something definitively broke inside my father. The little sweetness we sometimes managed to glimpse disappeared completely. In its place remained only bitterness, anger, and an even more suffocating control over me and my siblings. It was at this moment that I understood my childhood was over for good. At 13, I assumed my mother's role. I took care of the house. Richard and little Martha cooked, washed, ironed, and I still tried to go to school because Miss Thompson insisted I was too smart to stop studying. But my father's eyes followed me everywhere, and his words became harsher every day. You're not going to be like those loose girls in town. As long as I'm alive, you'll stay in line, Margaret, or you'll regret it. And so, between mourning for my mother and fear of my father, I left behind that girl who once dreamed of being a teacher like Miss Thompson, who loved to play hopscotch, and who believed that the world out there had more good than bad things to offer. After Mama was gone, the house became even more silent. The smell of flowers that she always put in a small vase on the dining room table disappeared, as did her soft little songs while washing clothes in the basin. Now it was me who tried to keep the house in order, take care of my siblings, and still go to school, although I often missed classes to keep up with everything. At 15, I was practically the lady of the house. I woke up before sunrise to light the wood stove, prepare coffee for my father and my siblings, get lunch started. Richard at 13 began working as a helper on the railroad too, influenced by Daddy. As for little Martha, at just 8 years old, she was under my care when she wasn't at school. Watch that girl, Margaret. I don't want her getting lost out there while I'm working. My father ordered every day before leaving. And I obeyed, afraid of what would happen if he came home and didn't find everything as he expected. Gradually, I lost contact with my school friends. Doris would come visit me once in a while, but soon realized that my father didn't like having her there. That girl is too loose. He would grumble after she left. She's out there talking to just anyone. She's not company for you. Over time, even Doris stopped coming. I would see her from afar at Sunday Mass, surrounded by other girls, laughing and talking about things I was no longer a part of. Once she waved at me, and I could only smile briefly before feeling my father's hand tighten on my arm, pulling me away. Miss Thompson was the only one who didn't give up on me. Even with my frequent absences, she would come to our house to bring lessons and books. Margaret has a gift with words, she would tell my father. It would be a shame to waste that talent. My father would receive her with forced politeness. But as soon as she left, he would put the books on top of the wardrobe where I couldn't reach. Too much study just fills a girl's head with nonsense. What you need to learn is to be a good housewife, not to be reading these stories. It was during one of these visits from Miss Thompson, when I was 16, that I met her nephew Theodore, who accompanied her to our house. He was a few years older, studying in Chicago to be a doctor, and had come to spend the holidays in Cedar Rapids with his aunt. Tall with glasses, he spoke softly and looked at me in a way no one had ever looked before, as if I were someone important, someone who deserved to be heard. When they left, my father exploded in a fury I had rarely seen before. I saw the way that young man looked at you and the way you smiled at him. Do you want to become a loose woman? Is that what you want? That night, he locked me in my room and said I would no longer go to school. If that's what school is teaching you, to give little smiles to young men, then it's over. You'll stay at home where I can watch you. And so it was. From one day to the next, my studies ended. Miss Thompson still tried to intervene, but my father was unyielding. I had only completed elementary school, and my dreams of continuing to study died there, locked up with me in that small room with peeling walls. The following years were of indescribable loneliness. My world was reduced to the four walls of our house, to the washing basin, to the stove, and to my father's orders. Richard, who began spending more time away from home with his railroad friends, sometimes tried to defend me, but soon got beaten as well and would leave slamming the door. When I turned 18, something happened that would change everything. My father's sister, Aunt Judith, who lived in Chicago, came to visit us after years without showing up. She had married a merchant from the city and rarely returned to Cedar Rapids. It was she who brought a little light to my cloistered existence. My goodness, Edward, what have you done to this girl? She looks like a bird in a cage, she said upon seeing me, so thin and pale, with downcast eyes and hands, always busy with some household chore. Margaret needs to live a little, meet people, have friendships. My father was furious with his sister's comments, but he couldn't treat her the way he treated us. Aunt Judith was a determined woman, one of those who didn't bow her head to anyone. And it was she who proposed something that sounded like music to my ears. Edward, I need help at my home in Chicago. I have many social commitments with my husband, and need someone trustworthy to help me with the house. Why don't you let Margaret come with me for a while? She could get to know the city, and I would pay her a good salary. My heart raced when I heard that. Chicago, the big city, a place far from my father's suffocating control. But my hope soon withered when I saw his expression. No way. My daughter is not going to that city full of perdition. I've seen what happens to girls who go to Chicago. They come back shameless with ideas that are no good. The discussion between them was heated, with Aunt Judith insisting that I was already of age and had the right to decide my own path. My father, in turn, pounded on the table, saying that while I lived under his roof, I would follow his rules. I observed everything in silence without the courage to interfere, but praying that my aunt would manage to convince him. And to my surprise, after much insistence, and the promise that I would be under her constant vigilance, my father finally gave in. Not without making it clear that it was a temporary situation. 3 months, not a day more, he determined. And if I hear of any inappropriate behavior, I'll come get her personally, even if I have to walk. That night, alone in my room, I cried with joy for the first time in years. 3 months away from that house, away from the shouting, the orders, the constant fear. It seemed like a dream. I left for Chicago on a rainy morning in October 1965. I carried a small suitcase with my few clothes and hidden among them a book that Miss Thompson had given me years before, Wuthering Heights. It was my little treasure, my window to a world beyond the walls of my prison. Aunt Judith's house in Chicago in the Hyde Park neighborhood was so different from ours in Cedar Rapids that it seemed to belong to another universe. It had 2 floors, colored tile flooring, polished furniture that shone, and even a television set, something I had only heard about. Here you'll have your own little room, Margaret, Aunt Judith told me, showing me a small but cozy room at the back of the house. And on Sundays, you'll have the day off to go out and get to know the city. In the first few days, I felt lost with so much freedom. I found it strange not having someone controlling my every step, telling me what I could or couldn't do. Aunt Judith was demanding with the housework, but she never treated me with the harshness I was used to. Her husband, Uncle William, was a quiet man who spent most of his time at the fabric store he owned downtown. It was on one of my Sunday days off that I met Harold. Aunt Judith had taught me how to ride the bus, and given me permission to go to Mass at Holy Name Cathedral. After the religious service, I was admiring the square when I dropped my handkerchief. A tall young man with dark hair and a gentle smile put up for me. "Miss, you dropped this," he said, extending the embroidered handkerchief that my mother had made years before. His eyes were honey-cold, and there was a kindness in them that made me blush. Thank you," I stammered, unaccustomed to talking to strangers, especially young men. "First time at the cathedral?" he asked, noticing my amazed look at the church. When I nodded, he smiled more. "I'm Harold Brooks. I work nearby at Chicago typesetting. If you'd like, I can show you other beautiful places in the city on the next Sundays." The fear my father had planted in me made me initially retreat. Men were dangerous. He always said you couldn't trust them. But there was something about Harold, a calmness, a respectability that made me accept his invitation for coffee, right there in the square under everyone's eyes. That coffee turned into regular Sunday meetings. Harold showed me Grant Park, the Field Museum, the Maxwell Street Market with its colorful fruits and cheerful noise. And more importantly, he showed me that there were men different from my father, men who spoke with kindness, who listened to what I had to say, who respected my thoughts. When the 3 months were coming to an end, I panicked. The idea of returning to Cedar Rapids, to that gloomy house, and to my father's control, was unbearable. I told Harold everything about my father, about how he treated me, about my fear of going back. Margaret, he said, holding my trembling hands. I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I love you. I can't imagine my life without you now. Marry me and you'll never have to go back to that house. My heart almost stopped. Marriage, the solution I had never imagined. As another man's wife, I would legally be free from my father's control. But that wasn't the only reason I accepted Harold's proposal. In the few months I had known him, I learned to love his gentleness, his respect for my space and my feelings, the way he made me feel valued. Yes, I answered with tears in my eyes. Yes, I'll marry you. But I knew my father would never easily accept it. The battle for my freedom was just beginning. When the 3 months came to an end, Aunt Judith took me back to Cedar Rapids to talk to my father. I trembled with fear during the entire trip, clutching my small suitcase. Harold had given me a letter to deliver, to my father formally asking for my hand in marriage as tradition demanded. But knowing my father as I did, I knew that request would be like lighting a match near gasoline. Don't worry so much, girl. Aunt Judith tried to calm me on the train. Your father is difficult, but I'm his older sister. He'll have to listen to me. We arrived home in the late afternoon. Richard, now 16 years old, was taller and stronger, working steadily on the railroad. Martha, at 11 years old, ran to hug me as soon as she saw me. My father was sitting in the living room chair, rigid as a statue, observing my every move. So, you're back, he said dryly. I hope that time in the city hasn't put wrong ideas in your head. Aunt Judith, without wasting time, told him about Harold. She described him as a hard, working young man from a good family, respectful, who had serious intentions with me. As she spoke, I saw my father's face go from red to purple, his hands gripping the arms of the chair, so tightly that his knuckles turned white. You let my daughter meet a man alone? He asked with a calmness that was more frightening than his shouting. They met in public places. Edward, Aunt Judith replied. Harold is a serious young man. He's worked at the typesetting company for years, has savings, he wants to do things right. When I handed Harold's letter to my father, his hands were shaking so much I thought he would tear it without reading. But he opened it, read in silence, and then crumpled it into a ball, throwing it on the floor. Never. He finally shouted, rising from his chair. My daughter will not marry some stranger from Chicago, some opportunist she met on the street, and now wants to take her away. The argument that followed was so intense that Martha ran to hide in the bedroom. Aunt Judith and my father shouted at each other like I had never seen before, and I, trembling in a corner, tried to gather courage to say what needed to be said. Dad. I finally managed to speak, my voice almost a whisper. I love Harold and I'm going to marry him with, or without your blessing. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. My father turned slowly to me, his eyes sparking with hatred. What did you say? He asked, taking a step toward me. I'm already of legal age. I continued, my voice faltering, but determined. I can make my own decisions. His hand came so fast, I didn't even see it. I only felt the impact against my face, so strong that I fell to the floor. Aunt Judith screamed and tried to place herself between us, but my father pushed her aside. Ungrateful, he shouted as I cowered on the floor. After all I've done for you, this is how you thank me. Wanting to run away with the first man who gives you attention. Aunt Judith managed to pull me out of the house, with my father still shouting all the curses he knew. That night we slept at a friend's house in Cedar Rapids. And the next day we returned to Chicago without letting me say goodbye to my siblings. He'll calm down, Aunt Judith said, trying to console me on the train back. When he realizes that you're determined that he's a good young man, he'll accept it. But deep down, I knew my father would never accept it. To him, I was property, not a person with my own desires. My decision to get married wasn't seen as a natural step in life, but as an unforgivable betrayal. In the following weeks, I stayed living with Aunt Judith in Chicago, while Harold and I planned a simple wedding. Without my father's consent, we would have to wait until I turned 21 to legally marry without his authorization. But Harold suggested a solution. We could have a religious ceremony first, and then when I was of age we would make it official in the civil registry. Meanwhile, Richard wrote to me secretly telling me that our father was more intractable than ever, breaking things around the house and swearing he would bring me back even if tied up. These letters terrified me, but Harold always reassured me. He can't do anything against your will, Margaret, he would say, holding my trembling hands in his. We're in 1966, not the Middle Ages, and I will always be here to protect you. Harold's love was like a balm for all the wounds my father had left on me over the years. His patience, his respect for my space and my feelings, the way he valued my opinions. All this was so different from what I knew that sometimes I wondered if I wasn't dreaming. We decided to set the religious ceremony for June 1966 at the small church of St. Mary of the Angels in Chicago. It would be something simple with few guests, basically Harold's friends, Aunt Judith and Uncle William, and some colleagues from work. I also invited my siblings. But I knew it would be almost impossible for them to attend. To my surprise, 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a letter from my father. Aunt Judith brought it with a worried expression, saying it had arrived by mail. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. The letter was short and dry. It said that he had reflected, and although he did not approve of my choice, he did not want his daughter to get married like an orphan. He informed that he would be present at the ceremony, along with Richard and Martha to do things right. He ended by saying that as a father, it was his duty to give me away to my future husband despite my ingratitude. Those words left me in a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I felt an enormous relief at being able to have my siblings at my wedding, especially Martha, whom I missed so much. On the other, I knew my father too well to believe he had changed his mind so easily. I don't trust him. I don't trust to Harold when I showed him the letter. My father never goes back on anything. He must be plotting something. What could he do in a church full of people? Harold argued, always optimistic. Maybe he really thought better of it. After all, he is your father. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that deep down there was a little true love in that man who raised me. That maybe he could see me happy and be happy for me. On the day of the wedding, I woke up with my heart divided between joy and fear. Aunt Judith had helped me sew a simple, but beautiful dress of white satin with small pearls on the bodice. It wasn't luxurious like those of rich brides, but for me it was perfect. When I arrived at the church, my heart almost stopped to see my father standing at the entrance dressed in his best suit, next to Richard and Martha. My little sister, now 11 years old, was beautiful in a light blue dress and ran to hug me as soon as she saw me. "Maggie, I missed you so much. You look like a princess," she exclaimed, her little eyes shining with admiration. Richard, now almost a man at 16, hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Be careful with Dad. He drank the whole way here." I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked at my father, who remained serious, observing me with those eyes that always seemed to evaluate me, to judge me. He wasn't smiling, but extended his arm to me as tradition demanded. "Let's get this over with," he said in a low voice as we entered the church. The ceremony began. Harold was waiting for me at the altar, so handsome in his new suit, his eyes shining when he saw me. The small church was decorated with white flowers, and the scent of roses filled the air. Despite my nervousness about my father's presence, I felt a deep happiness as I walked toward the man I loved, who represented my chance for a new life, free from fear. When the priest asked who was giving me away in marriage, my father squeezed my arm tightly before saying, "I, her father." Then he handed me to Harold and went to sit in the first pew next to my siblings. Throughout the entire ceremony, I felt his heavy gaze upon me. I tried to concentrate on the priest's words, on Harold's gentle hands holding mine, on the promises we made to each other. This was the beginning of my new life, I repeated to myself. From today, I would be Mrs. Brooks, no longer Edward Wilson's daughter. After the ceremony we had a small reception in the parish hall next to the church. There was a simple cake, some snacks, and soda for the guests. I saw my father in a corner drinking something. He had brought in a bottle hidden in his jacket pocket. He refused to talk to anyone, just observing, with that look I knew so well, the look that preceded storms. It was when Harold and I were cutting the cake that my father approached. His walk was already unsteady because of the drink, and his face had that characteristic redness. "I need to talk to my daughter," he said to Harold, his slurred voice. One last father-to-daughter conversation. Harold looked at me, uncertain. I hesitated, but thought that maybe, just maybe, my father wanted to say a proper goodbye or even apologize for the past. How naive of me. Right, Dad, I replied. We can talk in the priest's office. It's right over there. I walked beside him to the small room, leaving the door ajar. As soon as we entered, I realized my mistake. His look changed completely, and the mask of the resigned father fell away completely. You think you're going to abandon me like this? To live with this type eater? He spat the words with contempt. After all I've done for you, all I've sacrificed. Dad, please, I begged, already backing toward the door. It's my wedding day. Can't we just? I couldn't finish the sentence. His hand flew toward my face with all its strength, throwing me against the wall. Pain exploded in my head, and I tasted the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. Ungrateful. He shouted as he advanced toward me again. Slut. You think you can trade me for another man just like that? You think you can leave me? His fists continued to fall on my face, my shoulders, my arms that I raised in a useless attempt to protect myself. I heard the sound of the fabric of my dress tearing. Felt something warm running down my face. The world began to spin around me, the voices and sounds distancing as if I were sinking in water. You are my daughter. He continued to shout as I slid to the floor. Mine. Understand. The last thing I remember from that moment was the distant sound of altered voices, and the door being violently opened. Then darkness. When I came to, I was lying in a strange bed with a strong smell of ether and disinfectant in the air. I tried to open my eyes, but one of them seemed sealed, too swollen to move. With the other, I could see white walls and a window with light curtains. A hospital. She's awake. Thank God. I heard Harold's voice so close it startled me. He was sitting next to the bed, holding my hand with deep shadows under his eyes, and still wearing the wedding suit. Although it was wrinkled and stained with blood, my blood or his, was my first confused thought. Margaret, my love, Harold said, kissing my hand with tears in his eyes. You're safe now. He won't hurt you anymore. Gradually, as the fog of unconsciousness dissipated, I began to remember what had happened. My father, the office, the blows, the torn dress, the darkness. What happened? I asked, my voice coming out and painful. I realized that my lip was cut and swollen, making it difficult to speak. Harold took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to tell me. When you and your father left, I got worried. You seemed so nervous. After a few minutes, I decided to check if everything was okay. That's when I heard your muffled screams. He stopped, swallowing hard, his teary eyes fixed on mine. I tried to open the door, but there was something blocking it. When I finally managed to get in, I saw him over you and you on the floor already unconscious. The dress, your face bleeding. Harold couldn't continue. He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking in silent sobs. I had never seen him cry before, and that broke my heart even more than my own injuries. What did you do? I asked. Although I already knew the answer from the state of his suit, I lost my head, he confessed, wiping away tears with the back of his hand. I went after him. At that moment, I wasn't thinking. I just wanted him to stop, to get away from you. We fought. He was strong, stronger than I imagined for his age. He was completely out of control, shouting horrible things, that you were his property, that no man had the right to take you away. Richard appeared at the door of the room at that moment. His face marked by an expression that mixed relief and embarrassment. My brother, at just 16 years old, seemed to have aged 10 years in a single day. The guests heard the shouting. He continued the story as he entered. When we got there, you were unconscious, bleeding, and they were fighting like beasts. It took 3 men to separate them. Uncle William called an ambulance and Aunt Judith is out there now taking care of Martha, who won't stop crying. I closed my good eye, wishing it was all just a terrible nightmare, from which I would wake up. My wedding, the day that should have been the happiest of my life, transformed into this horror. The dress we had sewn with so much care destroyed. Little Martha traumatized by seeing such violence. And my father? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. Harold and Richard exchanged a quick look before my brother answered. The police took him. He's detained for assault. Many people witnessed the state you were in, and well, there was no way to deny what he did. I felt a mixture of horror and relief. I never imagined that my own father would end up in a police station arrested for assaulting me. Part of me, That girl who still hoped that one day he would love me as a father, should love a daughter, wanted to cry for him. But another part, the woman who had survived years of his abuse, felt as if I could finally breathe. The doctor said, "You were lucky." Harold spoke, changing the subject. "Despite the bruises and cuts, there are no serious fractures. The eye will decel in a few days, but you need to stay under observation because of the concussion." At that moment, the door opened again, and a doctor entered, followed by Aunt Judith. The doctor, a gray-haired gentleman with a kind expression, examined my injuries, asked some questions about pain and dizziness, and then gave me a comforting smile. "Mrs. Brooks will be fine," he said to Harold. "Physically at least, the injuries will heal with time. I recommend absolute rest for at least 2 weeks." 2 weeks. Our honeymoon would be spent in a hospital room with my swollen face and sore body. This wasn't how I dreamed the beginning of my marriage would be. When the doctor left, Em approached the bed, her eyes red from crying so much. "My girl," she said, stroking my hair carefully to avoid touching the wounds. "I should have guessed. I should have foreseen that Edward would do something like this. His obsession with you was always sick." "It's not your fault, Aunt," I replied. Although each word was a small agony from my cut lips, no one could have imagined he would go this far, not even me, who knows him so well. Later that day, when I was finally alone with Harold, he sat on the edge of the bed and held my hand with an almost reverential delicacy, as if he feared I might break at the slightest touch. "Margaret," he said, his voice choked, "I want you to know that this changes nothing between us. You are still my wife, the woman I chose to share my life with. And I promise on my soul that never ever will I allow anyone to hurt you again." His words fell like balm on the open wounds of my soul. For years, I had lived under the control of a man who said he protected me while destroying me inside. Now I was beside someone who promised real protection, based on respect and true love. "I just wanted to understand," I murmured, tears running down my bruised cheeks. "Why he hates me so much. What did I do to deserve such anger?" "It's not hatred, my love," he replied after a moment of reflection. "It's obsession, control. Your father couldn't bear the idea of losing the dominion he exercised over you. It's not your fault. It never was." That night, lying in that hospital bed, while Harold slept uncomfortably in a chair beside me, refusing to go home even for a few hours, I had a vivid dream. I dreamed of my mother, Eleanor, whom I hadn't seen in so many years. In the dream, she was sitting at the foot of my bed, wearing the same floral dress she used to wear on Sundays to go to Mass. Her face was serene without the marks of suffering, remembered from the last days before her death. "Daughter," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered. "Forgive your father, not for him, but for yourself. Forgiveness isn't for others. It's to free our own heart." I woke up startled, the hospital room bathed in the soft light of dawn. Harold was still there, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, his face marked by worry even in sleep, and I understood that my mother, or at least my memory of her, was right. Forgiving my father didn't mean accepting what he did or allowing him back into my life. It meant freeing myself from the power that anger and fear of him still had over me. It meant rebuilding my life based on the love I had found, not on the hatred I had left behind. 3 days later, when I was discharged from the hospital, I went straight to the small apartment that Harold had rented for us in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. It was a modest place with only 2 rooms, but to me, it represented a palace of freedom. In the months that followed, as my physical wounds healed, Harold showed a patience and dedication I never imagined possible. At night, when nightmares woke me up screaming, he was there, holding me in his arms until my heart stopped racing. When I hesitated to leave the house, fearing to find my father at every corner, he gently encouraged me, never forcing, always respecting my pace. It was he who suggested that I go back to studying, completing my studies interrupted years before. "You always spoke of Miss Thompson with such affection," he said one night while we were having dinner. "She saw potential in you. It's not too late to resume it." With his encouragement, I enrolled in a night course for adults, while during the day, I helped at the small stationery store that Harold opened a few months after our wedding, close to the typesetting company where he worked. With each small achievement, a good grade, a compliment from a teacher, the first time I managed to serve a customer alone in the store, I felt the bonds of my past loosening a little more. As for my father, I learned from Richard that he was released after a few weeks in jail. He returned to Cedar Rapids, more bitter and isolated than ever. He tried once to look for me in Chicago, but Harold prevented him from approaching, making it clear that he would call the police if he insisted. After that, I never saw him again. Martha came to live with us a year later, when we managed to get a larger apartment. My father had become even more intolerable after the incident, and my little sister suffered from his fits of rage. Richard, already almost a man, managed to convince him to let her come to Chicago to study at better schools. It was the last time we had any kind of contact with him. Life has a curious way of rebuilding what was broken. Like a ceramic vase that broken into 1,000 pieces is restored with golden threads, becoming even more beautiful and valuable than before. That's how I felt in the years that followed that terrible day in June 1966. With Martha living with us, our small apartment in Lincoln Park became too cramped. Harold, always attentive to our needs, found a larger place in the Rogers Park neighborhood near the school where my sister studied. It was a simple 2-story house with 3 small bedrooms, and a little backyard where I soon began to plant my first flowers and herbs, the beginning of what would later become my passion for gardening. Our stationery store, Brooks Stationer, prospered modestly. It started as a small business selling only basic school supplies and office items. But over time we expanded to include textbooks, and even a small literature section. Harold took care of purchases and accounting while I attended to customers and organized the shelves. Martha helped after school, especially during the back-to-school period when business increased. In 1968, 2 years after our marriage, I completed my studies in the adult education course. Graduation was a moment of immense joy and pride. Wearing a cap and gown, I received my diploma before Harold's teary eyes and the enthusiastic applause of Martha and Richard, who came to visit us whenever he could. "Your mother would be so proud," Richard told me that day, hugging me tightly. It was the first time we had spoken of her in a long time, and I felt as if her presence was there with us, blessing that moment. It was during the party, after graduation, that Theodore, Miss Thompson's nephew, that same young man my father had so detested years before, reappeared in my life. Now a qualified doctor working a public hospital in Chicago, he came with his aunt, who had been a special guest at the celebration. "I always knew you would make it, Margaret," he told me with that same gentle smile I remembered. Aunt Elizabeth never lost hope. Miss Thompson, now retired and with completely white hair, was one of the people who most encouraged me to continue studying. She visited us regularly, brought books, and offered many times to look after Martha when we needed to work late at the stationery store. "You know, my child," she told me during one of these visits, "when you were a girl in Cedar Rapids, I saw a special light in your eyes. Even when your father took you out of school, I always knew that light wouldn't go out. It would just wait for the right moment to shine again." With her encouragement and Harold's constant support, I decided I wanted to go further. In 1970, I took the entrance exam for the English literature course at Northwestern University. I studied at night after closing the stationery store, often until late hours, with Harold bringing coffee to keep me awake. It was a period of much effort, but each page writ, each test passed, was like a brick in the construction of my new identity. No longer Edward Wilson's terrified daughter, but Margaret Brooks, university student, shopkeeper, sister wife. Our family grew in 1972 when our first child, Robert, was born. I had a smooth pregnancy, but the delivery was difficult and lengthy. Harold stayed by my side the whole time, holding my hand, wiping my sweat, giving me strength when I thought I couldn't go on. When we finally heard our boy's strong cry, I saw tears running down my husband's face. "He's perfect," Harold whispered, looking in wonder at the small bundle in my arms. "Just like his mother." Martha, now 17 years old, became a doting aunt and dedicated babysitter. She was finishing high school and dreamed of becoming a nurse. Richard, who had married a girl from Cedar Rapids, and continued working on the railroad, came to meet his nephew as soon as he could, bringing a wooden rocking horse that he had carved himself. Robert's arrival closed the circle of love and protection around us even more. Looking at that innocent little face, I made a silent promise. My son would never know the kind of fear that marked my childhood. He would grow up knowing he was loved, respected, valued for who he was, not controlled for who someone wanted him to be. 2 years later, in 1974, our family was completed with the birth of Anne, our little girl with dark eyes and curly hair like her father's. With 2 small children, I had to temporarily suspend my college studies, but Harold insisted that I would return as soon as the children were a little older. "Your dreams haven't ended. They're just on pause," he would tell me while cradling Anne so I could rest a bit. "We're partners, remember. We take turns so that both of us can achieve what we desire." And that's exactly what we did. When Anne turned 3 and started attending kindergarten, I resumed my studies. The routine was exhausting. Waking up early to prepare the children for school, working at the stationery store during the day, attending classes at night, studying in the early morning hours. But every sacrifice was worth it when I thought about the example I was setting for my children. I graduated in English literature in 1978 with Harold, Martha, already a qualified nurse, Robert, and Anne proudly applauding in the audience. Richard couldn't come this time. His wife was in the last days of pregnancy with their second child. It was during the graduation party that I received news that reopened old wounds. Uncle William, who still maintained some contacts in Cedar Rapids, learned through acquaintances that my father was very ill. Lung cancer, the result of decades of smoking those corn husk cigarettes that always accompanied him. The doctors gave him no more than a few months to live. The news hit me in an unexpected way. I thought I had already made peace with my past, that my feelings for my father, whatever they were already resolved within me. But I discovered there were still knots that needed to be untied. "What do you want to do?" Harold asked me that night when we were alone in our room after putting the children to bed. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Part of me wants to ignore it, move on as if he were already dead. After all, for me, he died that day in the church. But another part is still that girl who wanted her father's approval. Harold completed softly, knowing me as well as I knew myself. I spent weeks debating internally what to do. I consulted Richard, who also hadn't seen our father in years. He was clear. "I have no interest in seeing him again. He made his choice when he raised his hand to you that day." Martha, on the other hand, had hazier memories. She was very young when she left home, and although she had witnessed the traumatic episode of my wedding, her memories of our father were confused. Moments of affection mixed with instants of inexplicable terror. In the end, I decided that I needed to see him one last time, not for him, but for me. To close that chapter definitively, to look into the eyes of the man who had hurt me so much, and show that I had survived, prospered, become much more than he ever imagined I could be. Harold insisted on going with me, but I asked him to stay with the children. "This is something I need to do alone," I explained. He understood as always, but made a point of taking me to Cedar Rapids and waiting at the hotel, while I visited the house where I grew up. The city had changed a lot in the almost 15 years since I left. New streets, buildings where there were once only Lewis, the intense movement of automobiles that had replaced the carts of my childhood. But when I arrived at Kenwood and saw our old house, it was as if time had stood still. It was smaller than I remembered, more deteriorated. The yard where I used to play was covered with tall weeds, the cherry tree long cut down. I knocked on the door with my heart racing, not knowing what to expect or how I would react to seeing my father again. Who answered was a lady who introduced herself as Betty, a neighbor who had been taking care of him in the last months. "He has no one else," she explained, leading me inside. "His children left years ago. Not that I blame them. The interior of the house was even more deteriorated than the exterior. The smell of mold mixed with the odor of medicines and sickness was suffocating. The few remaining pieces of furniture were covered in dust and worn by time. And there, lying on an improvised bed in the living room, was he. I barely recognized the man who had once been my father. Edward Wilson, once strong and imposing, was now nothing more than a skeleton covered by yellowed and wrinkled skin. His eyes, sunken in their sockets, had lost that spark of fury that had so terrified me. When he saw me, a shadow of recognition passed over his face, devastated by the disease. Margaret," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible. "Is it really you?" I approached the bed, feeling a mixture of compassion and a strange detachment, as if I were looking at a stranger, not the man who had fathered me. Yes, Dad, it's me. He tried to rise but had no strength. A violent cough shook his fragile body, and Betty quickly brought a cloth to clean the blood that stained his dry lips. I'll leave you two alone, she said, retreating to the kitchen. A heavy silence fell between us. What do you say to someone who was your greatest terror, and now lies helpless on the verge of death? What words could encompass everything that remained unsaid for so many years? Are you doing well? He finally asked, his eyes traveling over my face, my simple but elegant clothes, perhaps looking for signs of suffering or failure. I am, Dad, I replied simply. I have a good life in Chicago. A husband who respects me, 2 beautiful children, a profession I love. I'm a teacher now. I teach English at the high school. I saw something pass through his eyes. Regret, pride, remorse. It was impossible to say. And Martha, Richard, he asked between bouts of coughing. They're doing well too. Martha is a nurse. Richard continues on the railroad. Has 2 children. He closed his eyes for a moment as if absorbing that information. When he opened them again, there were tears in them. Something I had never seen in my entire life. I made many mistakes with you, he said, each word seeming to cost him an enormous effort. Especially with you, Margaret. I don't know why. After your mother died, something in me broke. I was so afraid of losing you too, of failing, that I ended up becoming a monster. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to say it was okay, to forgive him as if his words could erase decades of fear and pain. Another part wanted to scream, throwing in his face every moment of terror he had put me through. In the end, I opted for the simple truth. Yes, Dad, you did wrong. You hurt us a lot, but we're okay now. Despite everything, we found our own paths. In that visit to my father, there were no dramatic reconciliations like in the movies. There was no convulsive crying or embraces of forgiveness. There was only a silent acknowledgement from both sides of what was, and what could have been. He passed away 2 weeks later, and I went to the funeral with Harold and Richard. Martha preferred not to go. I have too many memories, she said. I prefer to keep the few good ones. After that, I felt as if a weight had been removed from my shoulders. Not because my father was gone, but because I had finally faced that last ghost from my past. I was truly free to live the present and build the future. And what a future we built, my God! The years turned into decades. The children grew up. Life followed its natural course with its joys and challenges. Harold and I grew old together, side by side, as we had promised that day at St. Mary of the Angels Church, despite all the adversities that marked the beginning of our union. Robert followed the path of education like me. He graduated in history from the University of Chicago, and is now a university professor. He married Linda, a college classmate. And they gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren. Valerie, who is already 12 years old, an intelligent and curious young lady, and Mark, 9, who has the same passion as his grandfather for books and stories. Anne, always independent and determined, chose business administration and works at a multinational company. She married a little later at 38 to James, an engineer she met during a business trip. They have 3 children, the twins Henry and Harry, 7 years old, true whirlwinds of energy, and little Emily, only 3, the youngest, who lights up our house with her toothless smile. I continued teaching English until I retired at 62. Harold sold the stationery store a few years earlier, when the large wholesalers began to dominate the market, making it difficult for small merchants to compete. It was a painful decision, but necessary. With the money from the sale, we bought this house where I still live today here, in the Ravenswood neighborhood in Chicago. When Harold retired, we finally had time to fulfill some old dreams. We traveled across America. We visited the Grand Canyon, the beaches of Florida, the mountains of Colorado. They were wonderful years of discovery and companionship. How he loved to photograph every place we visited. I have album after album full of memories of these moments which I proudly show to my grandchildren when they come to visit me. After he left 5 years ago, I had to learn to live in a different way. The first months were the most difficult. 53 years together and suddenly that emptiness in the bed. That silence in the house. That empty chair at the table. There were days when I thought I couldn't go on. It was my children and grandchildren who helped me find a new purpose. Robert insisted that I move in with them, but I'm too stubborn to give up my independence. Son, your mother has lit a cage once in her life. Now I need my own space, I explained to him. He understood, although he continues to show up by chance almost every day to check if I'm okay. It was Anne who suggested that I start taking care of the garden. Mom, you've always had a way with plants. Why don't you transform that backyard into therapy? She said. And that's what I did. I started slowly with some hardy flower seedlings, daisies, petunias, begonias. Then came the herbs, rosemary, basil, mint, which I use to make teas and season food when the family comes for Sunday lunch. Today, my garden is my refuge and my pride. Each plant has a history. Each flower represents a phase of my life. The roses, so delicate but with protective thorns, remind me of the lessons I learned about strength and vulnerability. The sunflowers always facing the light teach me to look at what's good even on cloudy days. And so I go on one day at a time. On Tuesdays I participate in the craft group at the parish. We are 8 ladies who knit, embroider and talk about everything from recipes to international politics. On Thursdays, it's the day to take Mark, my grandson, to his guitar lesson. He insists that I am his #1 fan and need be present for each progress. On weekends, the house is full. Children, grandchildren, everyone comes for Sunday lunch. I insist on cooking myself, even when Linda and Anne insist on helping. Let Grandma do what she loves, I say, while preparing that beef stew that was Harold's favorite. After lunch, while the adults chat in the living room, I take the little ones to the garden. I teach them the names of the flowers, how to care for each one, the importance of bees, the cycle of life that renews itself each season. Valerie, the oldest, can already identify all the medicinal plants and knows what each one is for. Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be a botanist. She told me the other day, and my heart filled with pride. At night, when everyone has gone home and the house returns to its usual silence, I sit in my green armchair, that same one that Harold gave me so many years ago, and look at the photographs on the shelf. My mother, so young in that old black and white photo. Harold on the day of our graduation. Robert and Anne as children playing in the backyard of the Rogers Park house. The grandchildren at different stages. A whole life captured in images. Sometimes I confess I talk to Harold as if he were there with me. I tell him about the day, about the mischief of the grandchildren, about a new flower that bloomed in the garden. You would like to see this, I say to his portrait on the small table beside me. And somehow I feel that he does. My dear friends, in telling this story that I've kept for so long, I don't seek to arouse pity or compassion. I share these memories because I believe that our scars when exposed to light can illuminate the path for others who are still walking in darkness. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. When I look back at that frightened girl in Cedar Rapids, at the bride with the bruised face, at the young mother determined to study, I see different versions of myself. All of them brought me here to this white-haired lady who speaks to you with an open heart. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. I carry invisible marks that only God and I know. But they don't define me. What defines me are the choices I made after each fall, the decision to get up even when it seemed impossible. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. There are days when I still dream about that dark room in Cedar Rapids, about that room in the church where my own father tried to destroy my happiness. But I wake up and see the sun coming through the window, hear the birds in my garden, and know that I won. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have become bitter, distrustful, unable to love. Instead, I chose to trust, to build, to flourish. I chose to be for my children and grandchildren the opposite of what my father was to me. A safe harbor, not a constant storm. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. In the darkest moments of my life, when I thought I was alone, someone always appeared to extend a hand to me. Aunt Judith, Miss Thompson, my dear Harold, and later my children and friends. If you're going through difficult times, if someone who should love you is hurting you, know that you're not alone. In every city, in every country, there are people ready to help. Seek information about protection in your region. Trust those who deserve your trust. Don't isolate yourself. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the worst circumstances, we have within us the seed of overcoming. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen. Even when they tried to take everything from me, I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. But falls are inevitable, but staying on the ground is a choice. Always choose to get up, even if you need help to do so. My dear friends who are watching me, if this story touched your heart, please click like and subscribe to the channel. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing experiences that can make a difference in someone's life. If you know someone who is suffering under the abusive control of another person, share this video immediately. Your action could be the first step toward that person's liberation. Leave in the comments the word courage if you watched until here. This simple word represents everything I wished for years and finally conquered. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Together we form a chain of support and hope that can reach those who need it most. And always remember, age has given me the wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. Dignity and respect are universal values. No matter where you are, extend your hand. Be part of the solution. Together as a global community, we can make a difference. Oh, and don't forget to let me know in the comments which town you're watching from. I love to know that my Grandparents' Tales channel is reaching people from all over. Is it morning, afternoon, or evening where you are? I read every comment, and it brings me such joy to connect with all of you.